Hello and welcome to the precursor to the textbook. I'd like to give this short PowerPoint because I want to get some of these basic terminologies down before we get into some of the examples in the textbook. I feel that this helps students out immensely when it comes to the basic terminology. There's a good chance you'll see the terminology again when it comes to the actual book. So this will help out a little bit. And so what I ended up doing was I found several examples of artwork in that I'm gonna give you some basic ways to describe it, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and talk about this first image here. Maybe some of you recognize this piece. It's actually one of my favorite pieces of the Renaissance. When it comes to works from the Renaissance, a lot of biblical work. There is a lot of biblical work in Western art in general. So for some of you who might recognize this work, it's actually a painting by Leonardo da Vinci. One of his few finished paintings. Something about da Vinci, he's known to be this master artist, yet most of his works, most of his found works are actually drawings and studies and sketches, and that he only has a few finished paintings. What he ended up doing was he would be commissioned. He was only doing these really for commissions. He would work on them and then he would put them aside and then he would get into another project. And then if he wouldn't really feel interested in the project, he would just put it off to the side and work on something else. And so yeah, he only has a few finished paintings, at least so far, as what many people know. And so this work here is called the Annunciation. The Annunciation is the scene of the Archangel Gabriel coming to visit Mary, and that he is telling her she is about to give birth to Christ. And so I hope that you guys enjoy this work. And so when it comes to basically describing this piece, you could say that it is fairly easy for us to like because it is a representational piece. It is representational because it is of figures and objects that we recognize. So we recognize there's a woman here and that she is rendered rather perfectly. She looks just like a photograph, pretty close to a photograph. If we look at the angel, that the form is portrayed idealistically, proportionately, everything looks perfect, even the fabric. And so not only that, but the background, and everything that's happening in the whole scene is quite recognizable. And so because of that, it is called a representational piece, okay? So representational is one of the main ways to describe a work of art. I like to think of it as the standard. Okay, so now we're going to shift into something different here. And this is a different work of art. It's actually not a painting. It's an example of printmaking. And so the process of printmaking is very different. The artist Hokusai actually using wood blocks, and he's designing, he's creating lines on these wood blocks, and then he's actually making these shapes and designs over and over again. It's a very early type of printmaking. And so this piece here, maybe some of you have seen it. It's very popular. It's used a lot in popular culture. I think I see it all the time in magazines. I see it all the time on video games. This is used a lot in TV shows, and And so it's one of the most iconic works of art that comes from Japan. And so what makes this work of art so popular, despite it being aesthetically pleasing? I love the pastel type quality of the sky and how that color is being repeated when we look at the boats, and that the blues are very, very good at counterbalancing the color on the top. And so aside from things like that, what is making this piece so popular? Well, maybe because we recognize, or maybe some of us recognize, that there is Mount Fuji in the background, okay? And one of the other recognizable things that we might see is if you look at the wave, you'll see that it is curved like this. It's like a U, and then it's going like that. And so if you can imagine, if there was a circle behind that shape, if there was a circle around that shape, maybe some of you are already seeing it. It actually looks like something that you would see in a religion, an Asian religion, actually, the yin and yang sign. Have you guys ever seen that? The black and white, and then there's that swirl, and then there's circles in there. The symbol of Taoism, this one of the most followed religions in Asia, following the religions like Buddhism and Hindu. Taoism is one of the main ones that comes from Asia, from China particularly. And so anyhow, that symbol is very recognizable. And some of the other things that makes this work so wonderful is the quality of the tidal waves. They're almost like these claws representing this idea that there's a very chaotic scene happening. And you can tell that the people in the boat look very afraid. And so anyhow, what was I getting to? What is my point of all this? Okay, so this work is also representational because it is of objects that we recognize. Yet, because there are some parts of it that don't exactly mimic reality, then suddenly the work of art tips into the side of abstraction. So a lot of you have heard of the terminology abstract. Abstract basically means that it's borrowing from something. So if it looks like something that we recognize, yet it is somehow exaggerated or manipulated in a way to be more expressive, then suddenly it becomes a little bit more on the abstract side of things. Okay, so we recognize it, yet the artist is doing something to manipulate it, to exaggerate it, and suddenly it becomes a little bit more on the abstract side. Okay, so I hope that you guys like that piece by Hokusai, The Giant Wave off Kanagawa. And so let me move on to another work of art here. A lot of you probably recognize this, The Thinker by Rodin. And so this too is representational. But if you look at the quality of his skin, look at all of the different textures. And something about Rodin is that he is known to be one of the most talented sculptors. He was once accused of cheating. In other words, he was using a cast form to create all of his figures, and that he was very offended by that idea. So what he ended up doing was he would build his sculptures, and that he would purposely manipulate the skin and the texture. And so we are looking at all of these very interesting ridges and indentions and wrinkles, and that he's creating an overall expressive quality with the texture of the skin. And that's really his signature style. And so this too is representational, but it's a little bit leaning towards the abstract side because he's borrowing from reality, but he's pushing it. He's pushing it to a point of expression that he's trying to make it a little bit more of a little bit more of something that he is thinking, something that he is more in touch with, because in reality, when it comes to many artists, they can do whatever they want. A lot of these mass artists, they can make whatever they want to do, but do they have to make it look representational all the time? I hope not. And so just something to think about. So again, representational, but leaning towards the abstract. And now I'm going to go to another work of art here. So we recognize this piece right away, and we might know the painting and the artist, but we can right away say that it is a representational piece because it is of a woman, of a girl, and that we recognize everything in the object, a fairly standardized portrait. Okay, so this piece is called The Girl with the Pearl Earring, and that it is by Vermeer, one of the famous painters of the Netherlands, I believe, somewhere in the Northern European region. And that also a very iconic work. I see this piece a lot. I see this piece many times used in popular culture. They'll just make their own variation. And one of the reasons why The Girl with the Pearl Earring is so popular was that at the time, many Europeans have not seen this style. She's actually using clothing that was inspired by African fashion. And so for someone to see a girl with this design was a big thing back then. And so it's one of the early portrayals of a type, a type of borrowing. They were borrowing these designs from exotic cultures and making their own works. They were intermingling. So very interesting thing. So this is a representational piece as well. Another representational piece here. And I like to show this piece because I know there's another painting by the work of art in the textbook, and this is by Rembrandt, Jesus in the Sea of Galilee. And so similar to the other work of art, it is of a fairly recognizable scene. There are figures on a boat, and that they are struggling in the water there. Very beautiful work of art. One of my favorite artists actually is Rembrandt. I love his work. So I just wanted to throw this one in there because I like his work in general. Just the overall composition, that diagonal that is being created by the mast, and then the darks on the right complementing the highlights on the left side of the painting. And so let me move on. So we looked at representational pieces and also the ones that are a little bit more on the abstract side. And now here is another work of art that is also on the abstract side, more abstract than the giant whale of Kanagawa. And this is The Kiss by Gustav Klimt. And that we can't really see the quality of the surface here. It's a little, if you can see where the gold is, it's supposed to shine. But we don't really get that effect when we look at photographs. And so this is more on the abstract side. And whenever I use that term for students who are not that familiar with that terminology, they would look at the dress and the fabric there, and that would to them be abstract. And so there's a little bit of a difference between this kind of abstract and the kind of abstraction that we saw from the previous picture. So this is even more abstract. It makes less sense, but let me go over that again in a little bit. And so this work of art here, also very recognizable. So if I were to ask you, is this more on the representational side or is it more on the abstract side? You can say it's actually a little bit more on the abstract side. And that's good if you had that in mind. The Starry Night by Van Gogh. And why is it more on the abstract side? Because we are looking at this landscape, and right away, I recognize what it is. It is of a landscape, but it is not exactly rendered photorealistically. Instead, that the artist chooses to manipulate it so that it becomes a little bit more expressive, and that it is an indication of the way the artist was feeling. And so those are hints of what abstraction can do. It guides us a different direction in comparison to representational work, where these shapes and objects and figures make a lot of sense to us. When it comes to the realm of abstraction, suddenly the idea behind the painting changes. It opens it up. And so that is another abstract work here. Now we're going to look at something a little bit different. Okay, and so this one, Hieronymus Bosch, The Garden of Delight, a triptych work of art. In other words, there's 3 sections, and these are images, also biblical themes. So you can, maybe some of you recognize some of the things here. Adam and Eve on the left side, the left panel. Many figures in the middle part, the middle section. And on the right section, it appears to be a scene of perhaps purgatory or maybe hell. And so we are looking at a scene that is relatively familiar, yet we can't help but notice how bizarre it is. And so when we are seeing things that are recognizable and that they are bizarre, now we are looking at something that we call surreal. Okay, so this is more on the side of surrealism. In other words, there's something bizarre about it. It looks real, it feels real, but if we, look closely and we say, "Whoa, what did the artist do there?" Totally changing the meaning of what we normally expect. Okay, and so I hope you guys like those examples. And so what I ended up doing is I made a little chart of how I normally make these distinctions between art. Okay, so the first one is, again, representational, and for the most part, it is representational because we recognize the objects. And so you'll see that with the word naturalistic every now and then. So whenever someone refers to a work of art as naturalistic, it contains entities of nature. So humans, plant life, ocean life, the earth itself, naturalistic. So representational is the most, I like to say that it is a standard image. And the way I created this chart was that there are these arrows. We can go left or we can go right, depending on what the artist is making. But when it comes to a work of art that's fairly standard, and by, don't look at it as a negative that it is standard, but I think it's a very easily liked style. Okay, and so say that there's a work of art that is representational, in that the artist chooses to go a different direction, that the artist starts to be a little bit more on the expressive side, and then now that work of art suddenly becomes abstract, and that we have a work of art there by Claude Monet, one of my favorite painters, even though it is fairly representational. I mean, I just from looking at it, I can tell right away, at least in my mind, that it is of a seascape that looks like there are boats and a hint of the city there and a hint of the mountain. Sorry, a hint of the sun. I put that there on purpose because that's how the sun looks right now. With all of the fire and smoke. Yeah, it's really bad, isn't it? And, I hope you guys are wearing your masks. Maybe not just for the virus, but also because of the fire in the air. So yeah, it's really bad right now. Anyhow, we have works of art that are representational. And then if the artist chooses to go a different direction, to be a little more on the expressive side, that he's borrowing from real works, real identifiable objects, and now the work becomes a little bit more on the abstract side. Okay? And so if the artist chooses to be representational, but then goes a different direction, and that the artist isn't exactly borrowing from reality, he's being expressive, but in a different way. So he's maintaining the recognizable quality, and that this, even though it is recognizable, it is a little bit on the side of the bizarre. So that's when the artist chooses to make works that are on the side of surrealism. So we have representational, and then this idea that things can be more expressive will go towards the abstract. But if he's representational but wants to totally change it up, he's going a little bit more on the bizarre, or going more towards surrealism. And now this is going to be the newer concept here that I'm going to talk about. So if an artist is representational, then goes in the direction of being a little bit more on the expressive side, yet still somehow borrowing from reality, where it is still abstract, imagine that the artist goes even further, than your direction of abstraction. Then suddenly these works of art comes into this realm of what we call the non-objective. In other words, there's no clear idea of where these objects came from. And that if you look at the example here, there are geometric shapes. So you're looking at circles, diamonds, rectangles, squares. These are all mechanical geometric shapes that are only found in the human-made world. And that it seems as though the artist isn't really trying to portray anything in particular. It's not like I'm looking at it and saying, yeah, there's a person in there, or there's an animal. Yeah, I mean, we can use our imagination, and we can, we can conjure up our own meaning, but just from an aesthetic point of view, there's no exact direction when it comes to this work of art. And so that is when it is called non-objective. Okay, so non-objective for the most part is geometric shapes, circles, squares, even just patches of color. Okay, so I'm hoping that this makes sense. We have so many, or there's all these are the basic ways to define works of art. There are a few more, but I'd like for students to know these before we get into chapter 1 and progress through the text, because this is actually brought up a lot, and that I see students getting things mixed around, especially between the abstract and the non-objective. I mean, things that are non-objective are basically abstract, but then if something is purely abstract, that means that there's a concept or an object that the subject is being derived from. Okay, and so by the end of this quiz, I'm sorry, I just spoiled it. No, by the end of this week, I'm going to give you guys a short quiz on choosing between these basic terminologies. So I'm just going to show you guys pictures and you're going to basically pick one. Okay. And so that is all I wanted to talk about in this piece. This PowerPoint this week, again, is just a precursor to chapter 1. So you're going to get, for the module, you're going to get a couple assignments. You're going to start your first project actually, and then you're going to get into your second one. And so be available